Norway, 9th century. In a longhouse lit by fire and soaked in blood wine, a feast erupts to honor conquest. The Viking chief has claimed land, treasure, and now, a woman. She is young, sharp-eyed, unmarried, a servant girl raised in his hall since childhood. Before the eyes of warriors, he lifts his horn and announces her name like a prize. She does not smile, she does not bow. In a world where a chieftain's word is law, one word from a woman no can summon a storm no man can control. The war feast burned through the night. Boars were roasted whole on iron spits while mead spilled in rivers across the tables. Men slammed fists, roared songs to Odin, and smeared ash across their foreheads. Their chief sat tallest, draped in wolf fur, his axe still red with blood from the clan he had just crushed. And beside him stood a girl barefoot, back straight, her flax blonde hair woven like a crown, though no crown graced her head. Her name was Eira, and though she wore the simple linen of a thrall, there was something in her eyes that unsettled the men who dared look too long. She had grown in the longhouse from childhood, stolen from a raided coast, but unlike other slaves, she never curled into silence. She spoke little, but when she did, her words cut. That night, as the fire cracked and drums beat louder, the chief raised his voice above the storm of celebration. "This woman," he said, dragging Eira forward by the wrist, "is no longer a servant. She is to share my bed and bear the next blood of this clan." The words hung like smoke. Some cheered. Others watched her face. Eira's chin rose. Her lip did not tremble. She looked at the chieftain as if she were staring down a wolf. "No," she said, not as a scream, but as a sentence. The hall turned silent. One man choked on his mead. Another dropped his horn. No woman had ever refused the chief, and certainly not before witnesses. But Eira did not flinch. She did not plead, and that terrified them more than any cry. The chief's mouth twisted slowly, not in rage but disbelief. "You think yourself too fine for me?" he asked, rising to full height, towering above her. Still, she did not move. The firelight danced in her hair. "A man who takes without asking," she replied, "is no better than a beast." Gasps rippled like waves. The chief could have struck her down then. He could have claimed her before the crowd, and none would have dared intervene. But instead, he turned to the shadows beyond the fire pit and barked a single word. "Bring her to the seers." That was worse than the dungeons, worse than death. In Viking lands, the gods did not write laws, but they could damn those who broke them. And Eira had broken more than law. She had shattered a man's pride in front of his pack. As the guards gripped her arms, Eira did not scream. But in the hall's silence, every man could feel the ancient chill that entered with her defiance, as if the gods themselves had heard her refusal and were waiting to answer. They dragged her out beneath a sky smeared with storm clouds, the kind that made ravens circle low and silent. 2 guards, one young enough to flinch at her defiance, the other old enough to remember what happened to the last woman who refused, kept hold of her wrists as they walked. Behind them, the longhouse pulsed with song once more, though it was a different kind of singing now. Not joyful, not victorious, nervous. Men sang to drown out the crack, forming in their chief's legend. Women whispered behind wooden walls, clutching daughters tighter. Eira's feet were bare on the stone, her soul split open from years of silence and service. But she walked upright, not as a woman broken but as one prepared. When they reached the edge of the forest, the guards slowed. The path ahead led not to a hall, but to a cave mouth choked with fog. There, seated on a slab of black stone, was the seeress. Her eyes were milked over with blindness, but her head tilted slightly before they spoke, as if she had already seen them long ago. Her hair was bone white, knotted into spirals. Her hands, streaked with soot, clutched a bundle of carved runes wrapped in animal skin. She did not greet the guards. She only lifted one trembling finger and pointed to Eira. "Leave her," she said in a voice that sounded like dead trees scraping in winter. They obeyed without a word. The forest swallowed them. Alone now, Eira stepped forward, her breath clouding in the cold. The seeress did not speak again until Eira was within arm's reach. Then she unwrapped the runes, pressed one to Eira's chest and another to her brow. "You should not have said no," the old woman whispered, "but I see why you did." Eira said nothing. The seeress pulled a small knife from the folds of her robe and sliced the tip of Eira's thumb. Blood welled. It was pressed onto the largest rune. The stone hissed, smoke rose, and in that smoke, the seeress inhaled deeply until her back arched and her mouth fell open. "The storm walks behind you," she moaned. "It watches you. And it waits." She dropped the rune. It cracked against the stone. "Your refusal has broken something ancient. Not just a man's pride, but the thread of fate that holds this clan together." Eira's voice was steady. "Then let it unravel." The seeress gasped as if struck, but she said no more. Instead, she reached into the mist and pulled free a tattered red cloth, a mark of judgment, not by man, but by the gods. She tied it to Eira's wrist and turned away. That was the end of the trial. No sentence, no execution, only a color. But when the guards saw that red cloth, they went pale. One whispered, "She will walk the path." The other did not answer, because only the dead or the cursed walked the shame path, and Eira was neither yet. The red cloth tied to Eira's wrist became her sentence. No horn was blown, no verdict declared before the clan. The chief did not speak her name again, not even in rage. To him, she was already gone. But the punishment chosen was older than any jarl's law. It came from the time of the first settlers, when shame was a colder blade than steel. Eira would be made an example not by chains or wounds, but by the eyes of every soul she passed. At dawn, they dressed her in a tunic of rough wool, stained with ash. Her hair was unbraided and left to hang wild, like a beast untamed. Around her neck, they fastened a collar, carved from bone, not tight enough to wound, but enough to mark her as touched by the gods. The path she would walk stretched across 9 villages, winding along the fjords and forests. It was said to take 40 days, though most women did not last half that. Some threw themselves from cliffs, others vanished in the woods, their bodies never found. But Eira did not cry when the horn was blown. She did not plead when the guards took position behind her. As the longhouse doors opened, she stepped into the frost without looking back. The first village met her with silence. Children peeked from doorways, their eyes wide. Old men stared through smoke as she passed. A few women spat on the ground, muttering prayers to ward off the curse, but no one touched her. That would have risked sharing her fate. The guards walked at a distance, not protecting her, but ensuring she finished the march. That was the point. The punishment was not pain, but exposure. Let them see her, let them judge, let them forget she had once been one of them. In the second village, someone threw a clump of dung. It hit her leg, stuck to her tunic. She didn't react. In the third, a boy shouted that she had bewitched the chief, that she had poisoned the mead. His mother smacked him silent, but not out of pity, only fear. By the 5th day, the wind had begun to bite her skin raw. Her lips cracked, her feet bled into her shoes, but her spine never bent. At night, she slept beneath trees, tied to a post so she wouldn't flee. The guards took shifts watching her, whispering stories of her defiance like men retelling a nightmare they didn't want to believe. And still, she said nothing. No prayer, no apology, just silence. The kind that made the firelight flicker strangely when she sat near it. By the time they reached the 4th village, one of the guards could not meet her eyes. The other began calling her Stormborn under his breath, because something had changed. Not in her, in the world around her. As if by saying no, she had pulled a thread in the sky and the gods were waiting to see what unraveled next. By the 13th day, the shame no longer clung to her skin. It had sunk into the eyes of those who watched her pass. What was meant to humiliate her had begun to unnerve them. The collar of bone around her neck, the red cloth on her wrist, the torn tunic flapping in the cold wind. These had become symbols not of disgrace, but of something the villagers couldn't name. Children stopped mocking. Elders no longer spit. In one village, a woman offered her a crust of bread when the guards weren't looking. Eira didn't take it. Not because she was proud, but because she knew kindness could be punished too. She had seen it before. When the daughter of a trader once refused a marriage, and another woman had tried to hide her, both were branded, one on the shoulder, one on the face. This was how power was enforced not by law, but by memory. Still, the path stretched on. Her feet had blistered, then scabbed, then torn again. Her fingers were cracked from the cold. Every night, she curled beneath a fir, too thin for the northern frost, and the guards lit a fire, just far enough to remind her she was not one of them. But even they had changed. The older one, Einar, stopped calling her girl. Now he said her name, low and careful, as if it might burn his tongue. The younger one, Loke, had once laughed when she tripped on a root. Now he looked away when she fell. They still followed the chief's orders, but they did it without joy. The ritual had become something else entirely. In the 7th village, the elders tried to stop the procession. They said she carried a curse, that her presence would bring famine or plague. The guards argued back, not out of loyalty to her but because they feared something worse if the ritual was interrupted. That night, the village lit fires on every rooftop, not to welcome the gods, but to keep her away. And as she sat in the darkness outside the gates, Eira watched the flames dance like frightened spirits. The shame march was no longer about breaking her, it was about containing her, keeping her power from spreading. The tale of the woman who had said no to the chief was already being twisted into something older, something mythic. Some claimed she was a daughter of the ice giants. Others whispered she was the last priestess of a forgotten god. No one knew the truth, no one asked, because to know the truth was to see the world differently and few people survived that kind of vision. Eira did not try to correct them. She simply walked, one foot in front of the other, leaving behind not just footprints, but a fracture in the order of things. And the further she went, the more it became clear she was no longer walking toward punishment. She was walking toward legend. The final village sat on the edge of the sea, where cliffs dropped like broken teeth into black water, and the winds howled louder than men. Eira arrived with her tunic stiff from dried blood and salt, her body shaking but not bent. 40 days had carved her thin, but her eyes had not dulled. If anything, they burned brighter. The guards had changed too. Einar, the older one, no longer watched her with disdain. He moved slowly now, like a man walking through a dream he could not wake from. Loke, the younger, had stopped speaking altogether. They still led her by the arm, but it was no longer with force. It was habit and fear. In the final village the people did not speak. They stood like stones as she passed. No jeers, no offerings, just silence. And in that silence, a storm gathered. That night, as the guards made camp, Eira lay near the fire but did not sleep. Her collar had loosened, the red cloth hung by a thread. The air smelled of smoke and sea brine. She stared into the flames, and for the first time, Loke looked at her like a man looks at a fire. Something warm, but dangerous. "They say you've cursed us," he whispered. "They say you've walked this far without breaking because something else walks with you." Eira did not answer. She reached for a stick and stirred the fire. Sparks rose like dying stars. "Have I cursed you?" she finally said. "Or have I only revealed what was always there?" The next day, the horn of the longhouse sounded not for her, but for war. A rival clan had crossed the fjord, slaughtering cattle, burning outposts. The chieftain rode out with his warriors, eager to meet them on the field. But Eira was not taken back to the hall. She was left in the last village with the 2 guards, as if forgotten. That evening, the sky cracked open with red, not the color of sunset but of blood on snow. Word spread quickly. The chief had fallen, his axe snapped, his chest pierced through by a spear bearing the mark of the dead clan he had once betrayed. Some claimed it was battle, others claimed it was prophecy. The guards sat in stunned silence. Einar sharpened his blade, but his hands trembled. Loke could not stop glancing at Eira. That night, she vanished. No trail, no prints. The collar lay neatly on the stone where she had slept. The red cloth burned in the ashes. In the days that followed, some said she had taken the fallen chief's sword and finished what the enemy had started. Others said she walked into the sea and became a shadow among the waves. But the women knew better. In the longhouses, when the fires burned low and the men grew drunk, the women whispered her name like a prayer. Eira, the one who said no and lived long enough to see the world answer. They never carved her name into stone. No saga sung her deeds beside those of jarls or kings. And yet, long after the chief's bones rotted beneath the earth, and his sons squabbled over the ash of his throne, Eira's story lingered quiet as snow, sharp as winter wind. In the years that followed, girls born under the wolf moon were said to carry her spirit. Women who spoke too boldly were warned they'd meet her fate. But in secret, mothers whispered her story to their daughters in the dark. not as a warning but as a guide. The shame path she walked was never removed. Its stones remained bare and cold, though no one dared march it again. Some claimed they saw her once, years later, standing at the edge of the fjord with a blade in her hand, and her eyes full of storm. Others swore she had become something more than flesh. One of the old spirits, a protector of the broken and the brave, but no tale could agree on where she went. That was the power of refusal. It scattered the truth like ash in the wind. What is certain is this. In the land of wolves, where a woman's silence was prized more than her thoughts, one servant girl chose defiance. She said no to the man who ruled everything around her, and in doing so, carved a fracture deep into the bones of their world. That fracture never healed. It spread slowly, carried by those who saw her walk the path and wondered what it would feel like to walk their own. Power, in Viking lands, was measured in fear, but Eira's power came from a silence that refused to yield, from eyes that did not lower, from steps that did not break beneath the weight of humiliation. Hers is not the kind of story kingdoms are built upon. It is the kind they try to bury. But soil remembers. So does fire. And somewhere, in every woman who clenched her jaw instead of her tears, the storm still lives. If you ever find yourself standing in a room full of men who think they own the air you breathe, remember her. She never raised her voice. She never raised a blade. She simply did not kneel. And that was enough to shake a kingdom. If this story moved you, and you want more hidden histories like this one, subscribe to Forgotten Stories, Ancient World. There are truths that were never written, but we are here to remember them.